Sarah Martinez had been living in her small but cozy apartment in downtown for 3 years when the harassment began. The 23-year-old law student was used to working multiple part-time jobs to pay for school, but her rent-controlled apartment at $800 a month was the only reason she could afford to stay in the city while pursuing her legal studies degree. Everything changed when Mr. Peterson, her landlord, sold the building to a development company called Premium Properties LLC. Within weeks, Sarah and her elderly neighbors started receiving aggressive letters demanding they vacate their units for necessary renovations. "You need to be out by the end of the month," Peterson told Sarah during an unexpected visit to her apartment. "The new owners want to upgrade everything, and your lease has some issues." Sarah, who had just finished studying contract law for her midterm exam, immediately knew something was wrong. "My lease doesn't expire for another 18 months, and rent-controlled apartments have specific legal protections," she replied calmly. Peterson's face darkened. "Listen, little girl, you can make this easy or hard, but you're leaving. Either way." What Peterson didn't realize was that Sarah Martinez wasn't just any struggling student. She was the top student in her legal studies program, worked at the university's legal aid clinic, and had been researching tenant rights law for her senior thesis. She had access to legal databases, professors who specialized in housing law, and most importantly, she knew how to conduct thorough legal research. The next morning, Sarah began what would become the most important investigation of her academic career. She started by requesting copies of all building permits and renovation notices from the city planning department. What she discovered made her blood boil. Premium Properties had filed permits for luxury renovations that would supposedly cost $50,000 per unit, an obvious exaggeration designed to justify massive rent increases. But the real shock came when Sarah discovered that 3 of the permits had been approved in record time, despite missing required environmental impact studies. "This doesn't make sense," Sarah told her study group that evening. "These permits should have taken months to approve, but they were processed in 3 days. Sarah's investigation revealed a systematic scheme to force out rent-controlled tenants across the city. Peterson wasn't just targeting her building, he was working with Premium Properties to buy up affordable housing, then use fraudulent renovation permits to justify evictions. The breakthrough came when Sarah discovered that Peterson had been forging tenant signatures on lease termination agreements. Using her access to the university's legal database, she found that identical documents had been filed for buildings across 3 different neighborhoods. But Peterson's most devastating weapon was his relationship with a corrupt city inspector named Frank Miller. Sarah's research revealed that Miller had been fast-tracking permits for Premium Properties while simultaneously condemning apartments for safety violations that didn't exist. "He's been creating fake inspection reports," Sarah explained to her professor, Dr. Williams, during office hours. "The same violations appear in reports for buildings that are miles apart, with identical wording and timing." Dr. Williams, who specialized in housing law, was amazed by Sarah's findings. "This is criminal conspiracy," he said. "You've uncovered a citywide scheme to defraud tenants and manipulate the housing market." The most shocking discovery came when Sarah gained access to Peterson's business emails through a public records request. The man had been documenting his entire operation, including bribes to city officials and detailed plans to force out elderly and low-income tenants. "These people are like cockroaches," Peterson had written to his partner. A little pressure and they scatter. The old lady in 4B is already looking for new places. Once we get rid of the students and the seniors, we can triple the rent. Sarah discovered that Peterson had been using increasingly aggressive tactics, including hiring fake maintenance workers to harass tenants, cutting utilities to force people out, and even staging break-ins to make buildings seem unsafe. The most horrifying revelation was Peterson's senior removal strategy. He'd been targeting elderly tenants specifically, knowing they were less likely to fight back legally. He'd been scheduling unnecessary inspections during early morning hours, playing loud construction noises outside their apartments, and even tampering with their mail to intercept important documents. Sarah had seen enough. As a legal studies student with access to university resources, she knew exactly how to build a case that would not only stop Peterson, but expose the entire network of corruption. The first phase of Sarah's legal counterattack was filing a class action lawsuit on behalf of all affected tenants. Using her legal clinic connections, she recruited a team of law students and professors to help document every violation Peterson had committed. Sarah's research had revealed that Peterson's scheme violated at least 15 different housing laws, including fraud, bribery, harassment, and violation of tenant rights. She'd been building an evidence file that included recorded conversations, forged documents, and email correspondence, proving criminal conspiracy. But Sarah didn't stop with just her building. She discovered that Peterson's network had been targeting over 200 apartments across the city, affecting mostly elderly residents and students who couldn't afford legal representation. The revenge campaign began with Sarah organizing all the affected tenants into a coordinated legal response. She used her academic connections to bring in journalism students who documented the story, creating media pressure that city officials couldn't ignore. Sarah's next move was exposing Peterson's corruption to the state attorney general's office. She'd compiled evidence of bribes, fraud, and systematic harassment that painted a picture of organized criminal activity designed to manipulate the housing market. The most satisfying moment came when Sarah used her legal research skills to freeze Peterson's assets. She discovered that his company had been operating without proper licensing, making all of his property acquisitions potentially illegal. "Did you really think you could intimidate a law student and get away with it?" Sarah asked. During the first court hearing, representing herself with backup from her professors. "I spend 16 hours a day studying exactly the laws you've been breaking." Peterson's face went pale as Sarah presented folder after folder of evidence. The forged documents, the bribery scheme, the harassment campaign, everything Peterson had done was documented with the precision of a legal brief. "You tried to force me out of my home and destroy my neighbors' lives," Sarah continued. "But what you didn't realize is that I have access to legal resources and research tools that most people can only dream of." The final blow came when Sarah's investigation led to criminal charges against Peterson, Frank, Miller, and 3 executives from Premium Properties. The evidence she'd gathered was so comprehensive that the FBI opened an investigation into housing fraud that spanned multiple cities. Peterson, who had been systematically destroying people's lives for profit, was convicted on 23 counts of fraud, bribery, and harassment. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison and ordered to pay $2.3 million in restitution to affected tenants. But Sarah's victory wasn't finished. Her research had exposed a network of corruption that led to new legislation protecting rent-controlled housing and strengthening tenant rights across the state. The university recognized Sarah's work by awarding her the Outstanding Student Achievement Award and offering her a full scholarship to continue her studies. Her case became a landmark example of how legal research and community organizing could protect vulnerable populations. 6 months after Peterson's conviction, Sarah received a letter from Maria, an elderly tenant in another city who had recognized the same harassment tactics in her own building. "Because of your courage in exposing Peterson's methods," Maria wrote, "I was able to identify the same patterns in my own situation. I stopped my landlord before he could force me out of my home. You didn't just save yourself. You saved me too." Sarah realized that her legal studies had protected not just her own housing, but had exposed a predator who had been targeting vulnerable families for years. Peterson's conviction had led to new awareness about housing fraud and tenant manipulation. As Sarah looked back on the experience, she understood that Peterson's biggest mistake had been targeting someone with the exact skills needed to expose him. The man who had tried to destroy a law student's housing had instead provided her with the most important case of her academic career. The investigation had revealed systematic abuse that spanned multiple cities, protecting future victims and bringing justice to those who had suffered in silence. Sarah's legal expertise had turned Peterson's weapon against him, proving that sometimes the best revenge is simply the truth. Years later, when Sarah became a practicing attorney specializing in housing law, she would always end the story with the same observation: "He spent months planning to destroy my housing situation, but he never bothered to research who I really was." That's the difference between a predator and someone who knows the law. I do my homework. Peterson had thought he was dealing with a naive student who would be too scared to fight back effectively. Instead, he'd encountered a skilled legal researcher who had spent years learning how to uncover the truth and protect the innocent. The landlord's plan for profit had become the foundation for his own downfall, proving that justice has a way of finding those who seek it.